rotten hooker.
The very lies the serpent told to Eve in the Garden of Eden. Garden of Eden. Garden of Eden. The gospel of Jesus Christ. Spread confusion and promote lies. The gospel of Jesus Christ. Spread confusion and promote lies. The gospel of Jesus Christ. Spread confusion and promote lies. The gospel of Jesus Christ. Spread confusion and promote.
Hey everyone, welcome to the next episode of This Non-Religious Life. I'm your host Ken. With me we have Jason.
Hello.
And Bob.
How's it going?
And today we're going to bring it back a bit and we're going to go over exactly what it means to be an atheist. We're going to discuss some of the basic terms, and in the next hour we'll be exploring that, and as well as a couple arguments for God's existence.
And maybe have a pint. Who knows?
Or two.
So the first question we get a lot, and Jason and I were out interviewing people on the street briefly before we started the show, and we discovered that a lot of people know what certain terms are, but then other terms they're completely lost.
Well,
So.
definitely we found that out. We found that, and it could be the area. We talked about that before. We find that when approached with questions of religion, because let me back up. Well, we started off with we asked very basic, straightforward questions. The questions of what do you think of when you hear the word Christian? What do you think of when you hear the word Muslim, atheist?
Agnostic.
Agnostic. I don't know why I was thinking of something else. And that's what we asked them. We asked the question, they would answer. We asked the second question, they would answer it. And it was very interesting. Nobody knew what agnostic meant.
Yeah, I think it was one person.
And then when we asked between the definition of what they thought of when they thought of Christian or Muslim, we got very, very political answers, very PC-esque type, word. Like, oh, it's good that they believe in it. And, I respect that. And, it didn't matter if it was Christian or Muslim. But nobody really got to a core what they thought about it. It was just very glossed over. And I think that's majority of how people view religion, or at least talking about religion, not deeply held.
Well, what were some of the things people said?
A lot of the answers were just very basic. Seems like almost no one knew what agnostic meant.
Nobody. I think only one person.
One person answered agnostic correctly.
Yeah.
And everyone else was just like, it was like Jason said, they were very like, oh, well, it's, I think of culture in the Middle East where people believe in their own beliefs and it's fine. And it's like, I was very, very super like skimming the surface, no real, you know.
Which I can understand when approached with, I have a better understanding when approached with a question of what do you think of Muslims? Because we live in a very charged time right now with that word. There's sectors of our country who believe that they're nothing more than terrorists. Yeah. And they destroyed Americans and, they should be done away with. So I can understand the feeling for an individual not to want to answer that question truthfully.
Well, I understand that. I mean, somebody, sticks a microphone in your face and says, like, hey, man, tell me what you think about Muslims and what do you think about Christians? Like, come on, that's going to be tough to answer. One, you're going to be very cautious about it. And, of course, you're going to throw out the PC answer. And that makes me wonder, like, what do they really think? And is there some other underlying thought process that's going on there? Like, hey, I want to say this, but I'm probably not going to because... And which brings me to an interesting point in that, and this is one of the points that I like that Richard Dawkins makes in the God Delusion all the time is that why does religion have this moral high ground where you're not allowed to question it? You can question someone's philosophical beliefs, you can question their political beliefs, but you better not ever never question someone's religious beliefs, and it's considered to be offensive. Like I wouldn't be offended if somebody questioned my political beliefs or my or even personally my beliefs on religion, but that's another story. I don't know. Why is that this realm where we dare not tread. But I say let's dare.
Yeah. I mean, it's part of our culture too. We are taught from day one that I can remember that there are two things you don't talk about, and that's politics and religion.
Which sucks. Those are the two things I love talking about.
And I think a majority of people love talking about that because when you get in an environment when you're amongst friends and everybody puts down there, I'm going to get offended, wall up. That's what everybody talks about. You either talk about food or you talk about what you believe in.
Yeah, I mean, it might be like that. It's sort of a double-edged sword thing, that right? We do like to think that we are raised in a culture of tolerance, right? So if you can't have anything nice to say, don't say it at all. Keep your mouth shut. That's what they think. I don't know. Maybe it is. Maybe it is a byproduct of a culture that wants to be tolerant, but maybe isn't all the time.
But I think we've perversed what the definition of tolerance is, because tolerance, in my eyes, would be it wouldn't matter what you believed in. That tolerance would you could say anything you wanted. You could say, I hated God, I love Buddha, whatever it is, and the person next to you who doesn't share the same views is not going to poke you an eye or something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and right. Tolerance doesn't mean just putting up with someone's viewpoints. It means maybe accepting them in spite of their viewpoints. I don't know.
Well, I mean, we do it every day. I mean, in your job, there's people that I'm sure that you work with that you do not respect, you do not like, you would never share bread with them, but you put up with them. You accept them for who they are, so you can get through the day and move along. And we just don't do that when it comes to, on a whole. I mean, that's a blanket statement, but on a whole, we don't put up with it when it comes to religion or politics.
Agreed.
So I guess the first job here is to define what some of these terms mean. And I think the first one everyone was sort of hazy on is, what does it mean to be an atheist?
It means you kill babies. Or at least
means you're a Satanist.
Yeah, right. It means you're a Satanist.
You're a Satanist.
Right. I think that anybody that thinks, my favorite rebuttal from people who want to have a debate with you when they say, well, atheism is just a religion. And my response is, well, that's like saying that not collecting stamps is a hobby.
Not playing football is a sport. Yeah. It's the lack of something.
Well, the A is the Latin prefix, not a theist.
Which means not a person of God. Or
well,
not,
you don't believe in any sort of. It means A is the anti-not, and then in theism means you don't think that there's any divine intervention in the world. It's a naturalistic worldview.
So what does that mean? I mean, what does it mean that you?
Very simply, it just means you lack belief in a god, and that typically, I would say 99% of the time, extends into other supernatural claims. But I mean, we can go over what it means to be a skeptic later on. So, but very simply, I mean, there are religious people who are atheists. Most Buddhists in the Far East are atheists. A lot of that's it. Buddhists. All that comes to mind, really.
Well, I think it was Dawkins. I guess it was Dawkins that summed up atheism the best when he said that it turns out that the universe functions exactly the way it should in a world where there is no divine intervention. There is no divine entity that will change the laws of physics for us or alter our paths, our destinies. It just doesn't happen. God, I wish I could find that quote.
You know who I thought you said? I thought you said Dawkins. I thought you were going to go into the metal band.
Oh, no. Dawkins.
I was like, Dawkins? Don Dawkins? What?
Well, I like the quote, Tim Minchin, if you're not familiar with him.
I love Tim Minchin.
He's hilarious. He has a 9-minute beat poem called Storm, and part of it, it's him debating with a hippie about all sorts of supernatural claims. And he says, throughout history, every mystery ever solved has turned out to be not magic. So,
No, it's a good point, right? You're right, and people say, like, people want to throw out a mystical worldview, and they say, like, oh, well, there's things we can't explain, and that's simply the God of the gaps. Yeah. But my take on that is always like, no, there's things we can't explain yet.
yeah, the operative words.
And it doesn't mean it won't be explained. Unexplained does not mean unexplainable.
Well, that's the God of the gaps right there. You say God fits in anywhere where we don't have an explanation. But what does that mean as we continually explain new things? It means the space for God gets smaller and smaller and smaller.
Well, no, it just adapts.
Yeah, the funny thing about gaps, though, is every time you fill in a gap, you create two more.
Yeah. I mean, of a person of faith, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter what has been proven and where it's been proven or how it's been proven, because it's all planned out by God. I mean, I was taught growing up Southern Baptist that dinosaur bones were put here on Earth so we can find them by Satan to test our faith with God.
Yeah, that's what I like to call the Satan is a dick theory of evolution. And all of that stuff was put there by Satan because he is a jerk. That's the worst logic ever.
Yeah. But I mean everything that kind of butted heads with history. It was always either God's testing you, Satan's testing you just so you can cross over to him, or it's in the divine layout of everything. It's meant to be.
It's just it.
Yeah, well, that's those arguments are it's really, really hardcore special pleading. Like, oh, well, we found these dinosaur bones. Well, those were put there, and they were put there for this reason, and they make this argument that doesn't make any sense when you examine it further, but you're supposed to believe it. You're supposed to think of it whole. And I don't know. I think that's a silly idea about the dinosaur bones were put on the earth by Satan to confuse us. And for that matter, and this brings me to Carl Sagan's views on theism. Is for that matter, I could say, well, really, I'm the creator of the universe. And I just created the universe, 50 seconds ago. And all of your memories of the past and your whole past lives, those are memories that, as the divine creator, I put in your head so you would have a past and a history. And I did it so you could be happy. And aren't I a benevolent God? And so prove me wrong.
Heavy.
But it's the same kind of the same kind of special pleading argument. Like, okay, I created the whole world and the universe just a minute ago, and everything that is there I put there on purpose for you to find in the future. I mean, that's the ultimate special pleading argument.
Word to that.
I think that covers it for that segment.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's just, but that's how. But I think that illustrates how, like, an atheist viewpoint, which is strictly a naturalistic worldview, it conflicts with anything else that is magical thinking.
Yes, essentially. I mean, once again, we can break it down between atheists and skeptics. I mean, I'm sure there are plenty in both camp that are one and not the other. But at the end of the day, an atheist is someone who lacks a belief in some sort of supernatural divine intervention. So that brings us to the next question, which is, what does agnosticism mean?
Which, this is the question that no one... Well, actually, one person...
Do you guys know who coined the term agnosticism?
Satan.
No. Close, though. Close. T.H. Huxley.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, Darwin's bulldog. He was the inventor of the term. He coined the phrase agnosticism.
Really?
That was his word.
And why did he do it? I mean, what's the story behind?
Because he wasn't. Because he was Darwin's bulldog. He was Darwin's advocate when Darwin was trying to write his book, And T.H. Huxley was an atheist before there were atheists. I mean, he didn't really have enough evidence or conviction to say there is no God. He had to be able to say, well, I don't know that there's a God, where there's no proof that there's a God.
Interesting. I know it. I mean, just like the word atheism, it comes from Greek, a meaning not, and gnosis meaning knowledge, which we can get into later on. But so, I mean, once again, agnostic is just someone who stands back and says, I don't know enough to make a decision clearly one way or the other. A lot of atheists I know, we call them flippant.
What's that?
Lazy atheists.
I don't know. I think that the argument between agnostics and atheism or atheist is the same pointless arguments between vegans and vegetarians. It's just really there's other bigger fish out there that you could be poking sticks at. And the fish was no pun intended.
Well, I mean, this ties into the idea of, weak versus strong theological arguments, where you can be an agnostic atheist and you can be an agnostic theist. And just the same way, all that means is, as an agnostic atheist, you're saying, I don't really know, but I'm going to hedge my bets, probably not. And agnostic theists fall into the Pascal's wager sort of like, I don't really know, but I'm going to hedge my bets that there might be.
I think an agnostic is just an atheist who hasn't read enough science books yet. Because like personally, my whole little journey was you're raised in a Christian tradition, and then you start asking questions, and then I look around and go, wow, you know what? I really don't know. I can't say. There isn't enough for me to say. So at that point, I said I was agnostic because I didn't know. And now I think the evidence points the other way. Now I'm pretty sure I know, and so now I say I'm atheist. And agnosticism it means exactly that. I don't know.
Yeah.
And that's a fair fallback position, I think, because I think that there's a problem in some religious discussions where people claim to know the truth, and I said, like, I just know, but what I mean by that is the things that I know are observable, definable, and testable, and have been shown and reproducible at that, and those are the things that I'm sure of. Whereas in a lot of regards, some religions, they claim to know the truth of some divine knowledge that you can't test it, you can't know it.
Well, that comes down to the difference between, the philosophy of science and, metaphysical philosophy of religion, where, metaphysical philosophy of religion falls into the camp of making claims that are not necessarily substantiated, where philosophy of science, it's a very strict school of epistemology that relies on empiricism and logic. Things have to be testable, verifiable. You have to be able to view them, and then you have to draw logical correlations between things that are viewed.
Well, my question is why is, from what we've learned, that the word agnostic people don't understand the definition to, when we as a society view people who admit that they don't know something as an honorable person, respectful person, because they have the dignity and integrity to realize when they don't know something and will voice it. Where has the line been blurred of where has the teachings, has it been on the non-believer side, the Christian side, or is it mixed of both, of why people have lost the concept of what the definition of agnostic is?
Frankly, I feel it's probably just too many syllables. But
well, there are some.
It's a crazy Greek word.
There's a G and an N together. I don't know what that. And it's a agnostic. Oh my God, that's tough.
Traditionally, it's it's sort of like the outgrowth of a long time ago. Agnostics, I mean, they were reviled. You know, if you were an agnostic, that was horrible. Until people started becoming very vocal atheists. Now the agnostics, they're the moderates. They're fine. You can be an agnostic, and it's almost like people don't pay attention to them anymore because you have a louder group over here.
Well, it's just, I know growing up when I was even a little kid, back when the big heyday of Bob Larson, Tipper Gore, when the PMRC, and just when religion and everybody was a devil worshiper was really big in the news and stuff.
The good old days.
Yeah. I just remember that Christians love agnostic because it gave them such a wonderful argument.
Yeah.
It's like,
No, it left the door wide open
because
for them.
Because to them, or to the ones that I witnessed, to them, it was like, oh, you have no foundation. You have no solid belief.
Well, that's it.
So therefore, we're going to
And
feed
that's-
you and devour you.
That's the theist argument against science, usually, is that science says we don't know, ... yet.
Yeah.
Where the theist will usually stop and say, oh, you don't know, and then cut you off before you say yet. Therefore, we're right. You don't know, I don't know, but special pleading tells me that my argument is obviously better than your argument. Dun dun dun, God done it.
Yeah.
You know, I love talking about science. And again, right, to quote Carl Sagan, science delivers the goods, man. Like, science delivers the goods. When, like you said, it was just when, like Tim Minchin said, when have those discoveries throughout the ages not been scientific?
Yeah.
But, you know, science, and a lot of people will say, like, again, they'll say, oh, my God, science is a religion, too, just like atheism is a religion. Right? No, science is not a religion. Science is a process. It is a process. And one of the interesting things about when people talk about science is the point of the process that they leave out is that science makes predictions, right? If you have a hypothesis, that hypothesis, if it's a good hypothesis, it should make a prediction about something, and it should make a prediction that we can test and we can observe and verify, right? Like if I wanted to take a theology course and take some theological argument, I should be able to make a prediction out of that. I should be able to say, like, oh, well, you know, God did this, so if I jump off a building and I'm faithful, God should save me. I should sprout wings, or I should levitate to the ground because of my faith.
Or
Well,
you should be able to raise the dead.
Well-
The Great Commission Jesus gave his powers to everyone who believed in him. Therefore, true Christians should be able to raise the dead.
I don't
Have
know,
we
but
tested
this?
Let's test it. It's falsifiable.
they do make predictions. So, and the reason what started this whole program was
May
Making
21st.
I cannot
2011.
wait. I cannot wait. Because that right there it is. There's a prediction, and you know, science makes predictions all the time that are proved wrong, and when they're proved wrong, they go, oh, that didn't work, so let's move on to the next prediction.
Let's revise.
Turns out it doesn't work.
Yeah.
So, I can't wait for May 21st.
but that's what happens many of times with the Christian predictions.
That's
or
true. They do
religious.
make predictions, and they're always wrong. How many? What is it? 0 for 200?
Well, did you see the new 0 for 220 is what I have
That's awesome.
counted. But
That's pretty good.
did you see the new American Atheist billboard?
no, I did not.
It's about predictions. It's 2,000 years of any day now. When is it just going to end, right? And I think this is a great way to segue into the next term. The term, and this is mutilated by theists, and that is, what does a theory mean? And there's a couple definitions for a theory. There's the colloquial term, like, I have a theory who stole the apple in your third grade class. But then there's the scientific definition of a theory, which is an explanation for a phenomenon supported by all possible evidence and refuted by none. So
Except God.
Are you talking about when they go, evolution is just a theory? Yeah,
just like gravity is just a theory, and relativity is just a theory, and
Dude, that's true.
germs causing disease
Right,
is just a theory, and a theory is the best possible explanation you can get in science. It absolutely.
But you know what? I also think that illustrates the humility of science, where where, and I know that's going to fly in the face of some people say that there's hubris in science, and I'm sure there is, but I think that the whole very use of the word theory is the humility of science, because that in and of itself admits that there might be some element that we don't know yet. Right?
Exactly. Well, look at
Newton's
gravitation.
theory of gravity.
Gravitation, right?
Still not wrong, right? But Einstein's theory of relativity built upon the theory of gravity, and it didn't disprove the theory of gravity. What it did was show us that there's an element that we don't know, and it offered us a deeper level of understanding. It did not disprove the other.
Exactly. Which is
Keep going.
okay. Which is, I mean, exactly it. Theories can be revised over time as new information comes in. But I mean, the theory of evolution, you look at it, it's been 254 years, 252 years since publication of...
150, I think.
I think it's 152 or something like that. Because I remember...
I think it's about 150.
It's a little 150, yeah. Did I say 250?
Yeah.
I meant 150.
That's
Sorry.
okay. It's all right. It's, nobody's going to be pedantic on this show.
1854, I think, is when Darwin published Origin of Species. And in that time, there's yet to been any scientific discovery which has disproven it, except for the fact that we have developed, theories of genetics and all these other theories that go along that just support it. Additionally, Darwin didn't know anything about genetics.
Yeah, that's an interesting look at the time, because right, Darwin didn't know about genetics, and he got a lot of things wrong. I mean, but it's kind of like I always think of it as like a multifaceted object. You look at it, and he's looking at things one side, the other side. And there's lots of things he got right, but some of the fine details he got wrong. I mean, right, and at the time he had no idea about genetics. He had that. Well,
it was several years before genetics.
Actually, Mendel was doing his work at the same time. Yeah. It's just that Mendel wrote it in a book, put it away.
Well, Mendel wrote it in German and actually sent it to Darwin, but Darwin couldn't read German.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, that would be crazy. Can you imagine these guys getting together?
Oh yeah,
that would have changed history. I mean, even more so than
Mendel's
it did.
ideas. I mean, they were poorly understood at the time. Once we understood, atomic theory, and we started understanding how molecules work, protein structures. I mean, everything. But molecular biology has all.
But Mendel didn't know that. He just developed the ideas of inheritance. He didn't know the vehicle of inheritance was DNA. But he knew that there was something. Until that time, it was like the idea of a blending, right? Tall dad, short mom means you get a medium-sized kid,
yeah.
Which right? That's not true at all. But wow, I didn't realize that. I didn't know that. I didn't know that.
I believe he sent him a paper outlining it, but it was in German, and Darwin actually died before he got a chance to read it. But he couldn't read German, so he never got around to it.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
I love that idea, because that's also when you think about Darwin, he was also serendipitously tied to who was the other guy that wrote the Australian guy that independently developed Marlowe? No. It was
I can't think of his name.
No, it was the guy that he wrote a paper about natural selection at the same time that Darwin was trying to publish
before Darwin published on The Origin of Species. He actually sent it to Darwin, and Darwin kind of didn't publicize the fact that this guy had written about it.
Well, they presented their work at the
together.
Right, what is it, like the Royal Academy of Science or something? They presented together, and just Darwin went first because he had been working on it for so long, and that guy was like, okay, but he had independently arrived at the same conclusions. Yeah, that was an interesting time.
Which again shows the veracity of science, when multiple people working in different ends of the world can come to the same conclusion by observing evidence independently. You know, if we're both given a structure to examine, we go in separate rooms and we look at it and we examine it, and we both come out and say that, yeah, it's, you know, obviously a stone that's been chiseled, here chisel marks, you know, and we both come to the same conclusions, it's even more evidence that the theory is sound.
I agree. What was that guy's name? Gonna drive me crazy all night. I'll have to look it up. We should cover Pascal's wager. I love that
we
one.
will. I love Pascal's wager. Well, let's jump into it right now, I guess.
Saving it.
Let's jump into it right now. For everyone who is unfamiliar with Pascal's wager, this is in the book Pensées by the philosopher Blaise Pascal. He was a French philosopher. He posited a sort of a gambit, a wager, whereas on one side you have God is real, and the other side you have God is not. And then there are two positions. You either believe in God or you don't. If God is real and you believe in God, wonderful. You win the jackpot, infinite happiness. If God is real and you don't believe in God, you lose infinite suffering. And now, if God is not real, either point just results in a null. This means that no matter what, living your life as God is real always wins the bet. There are so many reasons why Pascal's wager is absolutely just riddled with fallacies.
Well, first of all, it assumes that the guy you're betting on is the right guy.
Exactly.
Which you would have to discount all other, not just monotheistic, but polytheistic religions throughout history. Ever and ever.
And, I mean, beyond that, you would have to account for every single god that people have never thought of. It's literally infinite. I mean, what he's presenting is a false dichotomy, you know, where it's either Christian God or no God. You know, what if Thor's real? What if Marduk's real? What if Kurnos is real? What if Allah is right? And then even get down, okay, Yahweh is right. And it's Christianity. Is it Roman Catholicism? Is it Lutheranism? Is it hyper-Calvinism? You know, there are 38,000 Christian denominations today. And those are just the legally recognized ones. Most of them are very exclusive. You know, and you can't be a Roman Catholic and be an Eastern Orthodox Christian.
Well, you know, I think the other thing about Pascal's wager is that it also assumes that if you bet, say you bet that there is a God and you're wrong, then it assumes that there's no penalty for that. But I don't tend to agree with that line of thinking, in that, you know, leading a life of devotion has costs. There are, you know, there's intrinsic costs involved there that aren't really considered in the wager. It's not, and he assumes, right, you know, oh, you bet there is a God, you were wrong, you did, all right, that's okay, right? So I mean, it's not a zero-sum game.
Yeah. I mean, if you waste your entire life being pious and following a set of rules, I mean, what if asceticism is the correct way, and you're like, oh, well, better be an ascetic just in case I'm wrong. You live your entire life, you know, eating dirt and never bathing. This is how Jason lives his life anyway.
That hurt, man.
Sorry. But I mean, like, exactly. Like, what if, you know, you waste, you know, 5 hours a week on mass and you're wrong? How many, over, you know, 80 years? How long is that?
I think I'm going to start a religion that incorporates every single belief, and you have to go through everything every day. So I'm going to be right.
What about all the mutually exclusive ones? Like
everything. I'm going to be right when I die. That's the key point, is being right when you die.
But I mean, Pascal was. I mean, he was in the pocket of the church anyway.
Well, I mean, I think it's an interesting thought experiment, right? And he does reduce it to the most simplistic terms. So it's a very, it's you know, it seems like it seems logically sound, but it's one of those things that the the degree to which you think it's logically sound is probably in direct correlation with like how deep you've dug into it. Right, because the further you go, the further you look into it, the less logically sound it seems.
Yeah.
At least in my way of thinking.
No, I mean, I think that's a fair analysis of it. It's one of those things where it's in a pretty box.
Yeah, right.
But
yeah.
I mean, no matter how much wrapping paper you put on dog shit, it's still dog shit.
Well, yeah. Well, that's true. I like to think of these things, and I always, again, like fall back to viewpoints on science. It's just so many things in science and in life. I guess it just turns out it's more complicated than that. And I mean, sure, you can reduce it to the simplest terms and think of it that way, but you should always really keep in the back of your mind, it's a little more complicated than that.
Well, the last problem that with Pascal's wager is putting it as a bet. An omnipotent God, I mean, isn't he going to be more likely to reward someone for genuine belief than just sort of hedging their bets?
Yeah, that is, yeah.
Like, sorry, God, I didn't really believe in you, but I figured be on the safe side,
No.
I'd throw my chips in.
I think it would probably run like Facebook. It doesn't matter if you really know the people who are your friends. It's the highest number that you have. It makes you number one.
So what you're saying is Roman Catholicism is number one.
Yeah.
They've got the most Facebook friends.
There you go.
About 1 billion. 1.4 billion?
I don't know. I never
Catholics
counted.
in the
No
world?
idea.
It's something stupid like that. It's a huge number. It's because they don't allow condoms. Big families.
Yeah. Bloody Catholics. Populating the bloody world with bloody people.
I think next we can jump into, we've done theories, we've done the argument, Pascal's wager. There is always, and I mean, you love science, the burden of proof. And this ties into how we were talking about atheism before, where atheism is a lack of belief, whereas most theists would say atheism is a positive claim. When you make a positive claim, you say something does or does not exist positively. It is on you to prove that the claim is true. If I came up to you and said, I can fly and shoot lasers out of my eyes, I wouldn't then say, prove me wrong.
Right. Well, that was what I was saying. Like I'm actually God. I created the universe a minute ago, and all your memories were implanted by me. Prove me wrong. You can't. You cannot prove me wrong. And any proof you bring to bear, then I would just simply say, well, oh, that's what I wanted you to find because I put that there for you to find just to test your faith. The burden of proof is definitely. I think the burden of proof is definitely on the person making the claims.
Absolutely. I mean, it's the only burden of proof ever rests on the person who makes a claim. Like, it's never on the person who doesn't believe it. Because until there's proof, there's no reason to believe any claim ever anyway. I mean, there are millions of claims out there. All of them absolute hogwash. But until there's evidence for something, there's no reason to believe it.
Yeah. And there's also the idea of proving a negative. Prove that God doesn't exist. I can't do that. You can't prove this negative thing.
Prove the flying spaghetti monster doesn't exist. Prove
Right.
the invisible pink unicorn doesn't exist. Prove underwear gnomes don't exist.
Yeah, underwear gnomes. Yeah,
Well, that's just silly. Everybody
Yeah,
knows it.
but a lot of times as having an atheist viewpoint, that's what's thrown in your face a lot of times. Like, oh, well, yeah, prove he doesn't exist. Oh, I can't. There's no way you can. But I think that's a poor argument.
But that is the basis of your argument, though, is that you believe the way you do because you have proof that it exists. So
I don't have proof God doesn't exist.
no, I'm saying, but you have proof that backs what you believe.
I have philosophical arguments.
Well,
that back up.
I do have proof. I know exactly the speed of light in a vacuum down to 5 decimal places. I can using science, we can shoot a hunk of metal into the space, have it land on another planet, and get up and do stuff, and then tell us what it did. Like, those are things you can prove. I know exactly the permittivity of matter and the magnetic permeability of matter, and I know how gravity works, and all of those things are testable, verifiable. That's different. Those are things that those are things that I like to talk, like to say. Another great guy, Christopher Hitchens, he talks about the things that science knows. And those are things that we have won. Those are insights that we have won out of ignorance and out of intolerance and away from religion. Whereas religion just hands out the knowledge and says, this is what you have to believe. Science has won those insights.
Well, what do you think about, there's a lot of atheist believers. Can you say that? Doesn't even make sense.
You can say that, atheist believer. I like to say that people with an atheistic worldview.
Yeah. Say that you lose your argument anytime that you pit against each other atheism versus science, or Christianity versus science, instead of actually dispelling the actual information that they're putting forth, what they say is fact. They said that it's a losing battle anytime that you pit the two together, because saying that they can't exist together.
Science and Christianity can't exist together?
No, I'm just saying anytime you have the argument for the atheist side to say, to make the argument based on science versus Christianity or science versus faith, they say it's...
I think that's a very subtle and nuanced argument, meaning that we all agree that gravity works, right? There's no faith, there's no theistic belief that's going to say gravity doesn't work. We all sort of accept that, and gradually, I think a lot of religions are moving towards accepting the claims of science. Even Catholicism has just recently said that the ideas of evolution are compatible with Catholic faith.
Yeah. Only since the 50s, yeah.
You can see the evolution of that thought, though, if you've ever paid attention to it. You could, I mean, even in Texas and the fundamentalist Christians and stuff would go and talk to kids and say, do you believe in evolution? And the kids would be like, yeah. And they go, well, God put evolution there. It just happened in a rapid
that's
session.
kind of the Catholic viewpoint now, is that this whole idea of evolution and natural selection, well, that's God's plan, and I don't really have a good rebuttal to that, other than to say that might be the logical fallacy of post ergo propter hoc, which means like
this being that becomes
right, like, oh well, since it happened, then that must have been God's idea all along, and we just now figured it out.
Which would be a valid argument. So just taking away the idea of faith and idea of magical men in the sky, or whatever the argument is, and if it was a science base, it's like we didn't know that this existed. But now with new evidence that, it could exist. It could have been part of the plan. The evolution was part of the plan. The 7 days just happened really fast. And from that point on, it may be evolution.
Well, there are actually really sound Scientific arguments for like the fact that a literal 6-day creation, absolutely impossible. Based
But it was
based on
God.
based on the speed of light and gravity.
Well, that's not going to get in the way of what's that guy's name? John Hamm? No,
Ken
Ken
Ham.
Ham
Ken
and the
Ham and
answers
his-
in Genesis.
Yep.
I mean, but
I think that's what it-
but that's biblical literalism, and that's why I say that the argument is very complicated and nuanced. And I commend I commend the Catholic faith for accepting evolution as being compatible. Now, maybe and like who knows? Like, right? They had to accept the heliocentric view of the universe. There was a time when the Catholic Church was like, no, the Earth is the center of the universe.
Only took them 500 years to pardon Galileo.
Right, and but then they had to go like, oh, well, yeah, it turns out the guy was right. And, all right, well, but then the church does this thing, right? And what was it? Was the what was it? I guess the syllabus of errors when they like and the church does this occasionally. They put out this document and it's signed by the Pope and he's like, the right hand of God. So he, it's as though God signed it himself. Where they go, yeah, okay, we were wrong about this stuff, but we accept it now, which means we accepted it all along, and so now we're playing ball. Like they really, that's part of the tenets of the faith is that because they agree with it now, it kind of means it's retroactively okay.
Doctrine of infallibility. It's wonderful.
And so, all right, so right, we could, and like I said, it's a subtle and complicated and nuanced argument, and you could hold up biblical literalists and say how like their arguments fly in the face of science, and we can giggle about it and be like, man, they're just plain wrong, but then there's the other end of the spectrum. It's a continuum with everybody in between, where I guess maybe on the other end would be the Catholic faith that says like, oh, all right, we accept it now. Yeah. And I don't know. It's a good question. Like I said, I don't have an easy answer for it because it is complicated, like so many other things.
Yeah, surprise, surprise. I mean, I think it's a finished argument saying that the two are incompatible when you look at what the Bible itself actually says about science. In the Bible, pi is equal to 3. Which they
didn't have decimals back then.
I have an engineering background, and if I ever rounded pi to 3 when I was trying to figure anything out, goodbye. Like that, you're done. That would make for some really bad wagon wheels. That's all I'm saying. Yeah,
I love pi though, right? Because pi is like one of those numbers. It's so cool that we don't even represent it as a number. When you write 3.14 or 3.1458, whatever you write, those are just estimations. If you really want to be exact, you write pi. Because pi is an abstraction.
It's an irrational number. And then, God, I forget exactly where it is in the Bible, but it is the idea that if you show a striped stick to a goat that's pregnant, the offspring of that goat will come out with stripes. If you show a spotted stick, the goats will come out with spots.
Who's ever seen a spotted stick?
Say, you get some paint, you paint, throw a couple purple polka dots on it.
That we could test that.
Yeah, and we have.
I'd be surprised.
We
He
understand.
has a lot of goats.
Yeah.
Right, let me guess, it didn't work, huh?
Didn't work. Surprise, surprise, right? So.
But what is the basis of that? Why would that conversation even come up? Why are you talking about pointing a stick at goats? I mean, what is the relevance of that?
The relevance is that when people try to dance around and say, oh, no, this science over here is fine, but then we also have X, Y, Z irrational beliefs, that when in reality you're just being an accommodationist. You're trying to appear less biased. But you can say, oh, no. Evolution is right, but it was God's hand. It's like a Trojan horse argument. You can say 3 truths, and then you slip one lie in. And if someone's listening to you and says, that's true, That's true. That's true. Oh, well, that must be true too. And this is how a lot of apologists who get around say that Adam and Eve lived with dinosaurs. They say, well, fossils are real. Fossils came from dinosaurs. Therefore, Adam and Eve lived with dinosaurs. And it's a nefarious argument.
I think it goes. I mean, I don't. It's very bizarre because throughout elementary school up probably till middle school, and I'm sure it's across the country, that they teach you, if like they give you this series of questions, they like, the sky is blue, the water, the ocean has fish in it, and they give you like 3 truths and then 1 false, and you got to figure out which one's the false. Which, if there's 1 false in it, the whole statement's false.
But that's presented as there being 1 false thing there.
Well, I'm just saying,
as opposed to presenting all 4 things as truth.
But we're taught, if out of all 4 things, if 1 thing is untrue, the whole statement's untrue. Where did the line get blurred that we accept, as in what you're saying, is that if they say a lot of truth? I mean, even in the video of Sam Harris that you posted on there, I'm not saying there's any untruths or truths in there, but he does the same thing where he gets the ball rolling, saying, okay, this happens, so therefore this should happen. And I really dislike arguments and presentations that do that, because it's very manipulative. I can't even talk.
Manipulative.
Thank you. To the listener, to the person.
I think the difference is when Sam Harris presents an argument like that, his final conclusion is presented as a conclusion, and it's falsifiable. You can go and you can test it and say, no, that's not what happened, and then you start from scratch. Theological claims, by definition, are unfalsifiable. You can't. They reside, and this is how they've remained for as long as they have, because no one can say there's no smoking gun. Say, aha, right there, you're wrong. It's actually this, because then all they have to do is backpedal 2 steps and revise what they said.
Well,
and
I mean,
they can
it's
escape right around any argument.
Well, it's the same thing that Bob said on episode 1 of this show. He said that, like, when you were talking about the Holocaust and stuff, he said there is no smoking gun that lays out the fact that, that the Germans did what they did. But if you put it all together, it paints a pretty big picture. If I got
that's exactly right. There's no document where it says like the Third Reich, kill all the Jews, signed Hitler. There's no such thing. There's no they call it the final solution, and there's no document which illustrates the plan. There's nothing there's no smoking gun evidence for it. But if you take all the elements as a whole, it does paint a pretty convincing picture.
So with that said, his argument, you can paint a pretty picture, and you can put the falseness or the truthness or the facts or whatever in there, and make it anything you want, whether it's biblical, whether it's non-believing or whatever. I mean, and that's what the reason I'm mentioning this is because I'm going to go back to what I mentioned before, is like and a lot of the rhetoric that's going out now is that it's always bad to put science against faith.
I agree, because science will always win. I mean, that's my take anyway.
But it's not. But the thing is, it's not that it always wins. It's because of that vicious cycle that you can paint a pretty picture, and if you have a person that can paint that picture, it doesn't matter if science is always right. If you listen to the person that's painting the pretty picture, you're going to believe him because he sets all these A, B, and C is true, so therefore C must be.
Right, but and here's the difference between, I guess, maybe science and religion, right? There could be a guy in the pulpit who is espousing a belief, call it faith healing or whatever, I don't know, and he has a large followers, and he's one man saying whatever it is he's saying. He's espousing a belief, and he's one guy. Whereas science, there's one guy who may come up with a great idea But that idea gets put through the meat grinder of all the other scientists out there. Science doesn't operate in a vacuum. It happens with cooperation and I'm telling you, if there's one guy that has an idea, there's 5 other guys that hate him and want to prove him wrong, but they can't. They have to accept his idea because they've tried to prove him wrong and they can't. So they have to go like, man, you know what? Guy's a jerk. I don't like him, but he's right.
Yeah.
That's how science works. There's that element of science it's called peer review, and you just don't come out with an idea and everybody goes ooh and ah and it's a great idea. No, that idea gets scrutinized by guys who are as smart or smarter than you, and they're trying their best to tear it down. And the ideas that survive, those become the scientific consensus.
Word.
Science. Yeah. Science. It works, bitches.
It works.
No, and I think the important reason to always pit science against religion is the fact that there is no room for baseless, intellectually indefensible positions in science.
But
so when people try to conflate the two, it creates a gray area of intellectual dishonesty. And I mean, that's a problem. Like, that's my problem with intelligent design. That's my problem with homeopathy. That's my problem. that was a bad face.
Yeah.
I mean, that's my problem with, pseudosciences, astrology, all of these things. We don't teach. I hate the idea of teaching the controversy, because it's like, we don't teach phrenology anymore. No, we teach, neurology. We don't teach astrology anymore. We teach astronomy. We don't teach, I don't know, magic. We teach physics. Science has a basis of reason, and it is philosophy. It's epistemology backed in empiricism and logic, whereas religion is, relatively baseless.
But you gotta have the people who, you gotta have logic within you. You have to understand logic, critical thinking, before you can understand and accept science.
Sure.
Yeah, but you don't.
But wait, you mentioned before the show about Bill Nye the Science Guy
Yeah.
in Texas.
I love Bill Nye.
So do I, right?
Okay,
Not a scientist, but awesome.
logic has left the building when it came to this story that you said, and just to let our listeners know, correct me if I'm wrong, if I got your story wrong, but Bill Nye was given a talk in Texas,
Waco, Texas.
and he mentioned that the moon was a reflection, was illuminated because of the reflection of the sun, and he got booed because of it, and people walked out because it says in the Bible that
Genesis 1:16, God creates 2 lights, gives the first one to the day and the other to the night. Yeah.
And
So.
somebody, when they walked out with their kids, yelled at the stage saying that we love God. What
We
was it?
believe in God.
Yeah, we believe in God.
They got mad. People booed him and walked out.
So, going back to pitting science against religion or faith, science, you got to have logic and understand critical thinking. Using this as an example for the lack of critical thinking, the lack of science knowledge, and this goes back to our education system. I mean, I told you, going to a similar story. As the listeners probably already know, I'm vegan. I don't eat meat. I eat at Taco Bell, and this is the same in Texas. I went into and ordered a bean burrito, ordered a taco sub beans. They take out the meat and add the beans. And the lady behind the counter says, "Can I ask you why you don't want meat?" And I said, "Because I don't want to contribute to the suffering of animals." Straight up. And she goes, "Then why do you eat beans?" I was puzzled for a minute, and I had to ask her, I said, "What part of the animal does the bean come from?" And she goes, "Well, it's in the meat group." So,
Well, that person obviously had a gross misunderstanding.
and I think that's the problem of why we're having these discussions and why I think that people are saying you can't pit the two together. Because using this example, firsthand experience, using the example you said with the Bill Nye people walking out and booing because they can't comprehend that the moon reflects the light of the sun to illuminate, so we can see it. There's a breakdown of critical thinking and logic somewhere, and I think because of that breakdown, if you put forth an idea, say, okay, look, Jesus can't exist or God can't exist because of X, Y, Z. These are whatever reasons they are. And this same teaching, this same, I don't understand it, but this, for lack of a better term, this ignorance that people have of wherever they learned it from, can't comprehend anything past what they've been told is truth.
That's the difference between critical thinking and rote learning, where people learn something by rote. You know, it sucks, especially in American schools. You know, I have a liberal arts education, but I went to school in Canada, so I can't really
Fucking communist.
say too much about but I went to public school in the U.S. And what they do is they have you, when you learn things, you just learn how to recite it back. You know, it's just, you know 2 + 2 is 4. You don't know why 2 + 2 is 4, but you know 2 + 2 is 4.
They just
generally
teach you to
speaking.
pass the
It's just-
test.
Exactly. Whereas, and that's rote learning. Whereas when you have like a humanities or arts-based education, you learn to hone critical faculties. And in the words of one of my professors, I will always remember this. He said, a humanities education will allow you to recognize and call out bullshit in all of its guises, because it gives you a bullshit detector. It allows you to dissect anything that's being said and say, you know, why is this way, rather than just taking it and just digesting it away.
So it's funny because I have an engineering degree, and we always made fun of the lack of critical thinking skills in the liberal arts majors. but that's a little bit of an unfair assessment because I have seen that critical thinking is a skill into and on itself. It is its own thing, and it doesn't matter if your background is in engineering or liberal arts or anything. It has no bearing on that. And the reason it's its own thing is because we are medium-sized animals who have been evolutionary selected to live in a medium-sized world with things at medium distance, and our eyes play tricks on us, and we are not geared to think critically at all. As a species, critical thinking comes difficult to us. It is not something we find easy.
It's something that has to be honed, for sure.
Agreed. It is something you have to practice, and it's not always easy. Like sometimes you have to accept. Sometimes you have to accept things that maybe you would disagree with, but you have to go, well, maybe it's true. You know, and even if you ultimately decide that it's false, you have to you have to consider for a minute that it might be true. And so at the end of the day, critical thinking it's a valuable skill, but it's not something that is inherent to any one discipline. I think because go to Sedona, Arizona. There's plenty of liberal arts majors out there who believe some crazy stuff.
Oh, I used to live in San Francisco, so you just crossed the bridge over into Berkeley. And that's
You live in Canada, communist, and now you live in San Francisco. You're
now I
un-American.
live in Virginia. I know, right? No, I mean, I think that's exactly it. Critical thinking is something you have to you have to hone. I mean, if you think that's bad math, like there were studies done recently that show most people cannot actually, like, they can't comprehend numbers higher than 5 or 6. It's just anything beyond that is just a lot. I mean, you understand what it is, but it's just, you know, it's hard to
1, 2, 3, 4,
grasp.
many.
Yeah, exactly. You know, anything more than 5 or 6, just a whole bunch.
Is that because that's how many fingers you have? Oh, wait,
Maybe. I don't know.
You know, there's a thought that we have a base 10 number system because we have 10 fingers and 10 toes. That's the theory, because there's, you know, we could have a base 8 math system.
Oh, and I was an engineering major for a while, and I used base 8 and base 2 and base 16. I hate hexadecimal.
But base 10 is very cumbersome, but yet we've made it work. There are other, you know, there's situations where another numbering system would be more convenient, but we have a base 10.
I like base 10. I don't like base 20.
Yeah, that would be
the Gaelics had a base 20 system. That's why when in French you get past 60, they start switching over to, you know, 80 is 80. So 420s.
I don't speak French.
Yeah. Again, Canada.
Nerds.
I think we're running out of time, but
Yeah, how did that happen? We just
yeah, I don't know. That happens. Jason, do you want to go into overtime with this?
It's up to you. It's your show.
Overtime?
So I got nowhere to be, man.
All right. We're going into overtime.
What are we at now?
We're at 1-5.
Okay. So let's jump into, I mean, we've dealt with this a little bit. Let's jump into theory of evolution versus abiogenesis and cosmogenesis. I find when you're dealing with theists, these are words that get jumbled up all the time. People think, oh, you know, this is, you know, evolution is the Big Bang. Evolution is life from mud.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Right. Evolution does not explain the origins of the universe. It explains the origins of complex life.
Yeah. Evolution explains the diversity of life on the planet, with organisms giving rise to organisms that are slightly different, which give rise to organisms that are slightly different, which give rise to organisms that are slightly different. And then over time, you have speciation, and then you have different genuses, and then
I think the whole Big Bang is cosmological and not biological, and evolution is a wholly biological process.
it is a vehicle.
Whereas the Big Bang is pretty much the best we have so far. There's problems with it, but it's doing a pretty good job.
You know, I have a friend Mike, and I got into this discussion with him, and he used to teach, I think he was the associate professor of theoretical physics at UPenn. He doesn't teach there anymore. He's I think he's like he's doing something with nuclear physics now. Like he's a consultant for some nuclear power plant. And we were talking about string theory and, you know, what they dub M theory, master theory, a theory that will unite all of the theories together. And he was like, you know, it's a great idea, but right now we just don't have the mathematical language to explain it. Which is something I found really interesting, but it shows, you know, again, it's science being humble. It's saying we can't explain it yet. We haven't developed mathematics complex enough. I mean, there was a time before calculus. There was a time before algebra. There was a time before trigonometry. There was a time before, you know,
fuzzy math,
multiplication. So,
no, yeah, that's interesting. The guy that another author I like too is Brian Greene. He wrote The Elegant Universe. When he talks about M theory, and he speaks a little bit about how we don't really have the math to adequately describe it yet. And what he says is just the problem is that grasping these fundamental aspects of cosmology. He says, you know, we're at the end of our cognitive rope. We just as human beings, we don't necessarily have the cognition to put these ideas together. Like if I told you that, you know, that that the strings exist in 11-dimensional space rolled up into a ball. That's kind of hard to visualize. But, yet that's what they think is the case. And, yeah, it's a good book. Elegant Universe. Excellent book.
Look it up. So, I mean, that's evolution. But what does natural selection mean? What does survival of the fittest mean?
Well, I've always found that people misinterpret that as, like they always interpret survival of the fittest to mean the biggest, the strongest, the fastest. But that's not always the case. It's the most adapted to survive. And I think that's the most common misrepresentation.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's given in any argument anytime you talk about diet, especially if you're trying to give points of why we should be vegetarian or not. The number one response is we're on the top of the food chain. We're for survival of the fittest. We can kill more than what they can kill, so therefore we should be able to eat.
Well, might doesn't make right.
Yeah.
And I think it's interesting that just like there was a time when there was primitive man and he relied on killing animals for foodstuffs to survive, and we were really good at it. That's why we managed to survive as long as we have. But I think now as a culture, we've evolved beyond the necessity of meat. You know what I mean? Like we've transcended that.
Even in the study, not to get into a diet argument here, but even with the studies when they found several frozen, past men, cavemen, when they dissected the stomach, they said that it was mainly fruits, berries, and nuts. They were actually that, and they did not that it wasn't ruling out that they didn't eat meat, but they said it was very rare that they did because it was more of a scavenger base instead of a hunting base.
Oh, I would think that would have to be like one. You'd have to take into account geography because there are cultures today like Inuit Eskimos. They have an entirely meat-based diet.
But they're not going to be in the rapture.
Yeah. but right. So yeah, meat's hard to get, right? It's hard. You gotta hunt it, you gotta kill it, you gotta track it. It's gonna be hard. Berries, easy. And I think
nature takes the easiest path.
I think that primitive man was probably opportunistic and.
Are you saying people now aren't opportunistic?
Not at all.
No, right. We are opportunistic, and I don't think anything's changed about that.
If I want to eat Twinkies 5 times a day because I can go down to the 7-Eleven and buy them, then that's it. Yeah. No, I think Jason hit the nail on the head when he said, nature takes the easiest path. If an animal starts giving birth to offspring and, all the food becomes only available at the top tier, like up in trees, animals that can get to that are going to be the ones that survive and pass on their genes. And eventually you're going to have animals with long necks, or you're going to have animals with claws that can climb trees, or you're going to have something where, the slight differences between the parent and the offspring, and that's survival of the fittest. The most fit for survival are the ones that do.
Have you read the Dawkins book, The Selfish Gene?
I haven't.
Very good. It's very good. And he kind of takes that idea of survival of the fittest and sort of turns it on its head a little bit. And the point that he takes, and it's a little bit, he does a little bit of he sort of anthropomorphizes genetics, where he almost imbues them with a consciousness, but he says things like, the whole purpose of your genes is to make little copies of themselves and to send those copies out in the world and to ensure that those copies survive. That's the whole name of the game, right? And in order to do that, that is what, whoever does that the best, that's the survival of the fittest. Not the biggest, baddest, strongest, not the one the best able to climb the trees. It's the one who can make them the copies of themselves last the longest and go the farthest. And if being a good climber allows you to do that, then that is going to be selected for. If if maybe you're not a good climber, maybe you develop a sense of smell where you can find the food buried in the ground. Well, then that's going to allow you to have offspring and make the copies of yourselves and send them out in the world. And it's sort of that idea of like maybe survival of the fittest isn't always who's the best at whatever. It's who's the best at making the copies of themselves. And there's another, and it brings up another idea, like maybe it's just this animal was a good parent. It did a really good job of protecting its young. Or he even throws out altruism. Like not only did it do a good job of protecting its young, but it did a good job of protecting siblings, and by extension, litter mates, and by extension, pack mates. It's an interesting read.
Yeah, I'm familiar with that argument. The argument about altruism, and I think we can use that to segue into the next thing, which is actually an argument for God. It's called the moral law argument. And what essentially this says is that as atheists, since we don't have a moral lawgiver in the form of God, we absolutely cannot be moral creatures. There's only, moral subjectivity, and ethics are a point which we can never touch on because there is no objective truth. And I think one of the best things against that is the fact that, as a social species, altruism has its benefits. You can't be a complete sociopath and survive in society, at least not well, especially in like primitive societies where you have only maybe, between 10 and 20 people. If everyone in the group views you as a selfish, murderer, no one's going to share their food with you. No one's going to share their tools with you. No one's going to share their labor with you. And you're going to get ostracized and die alone. So being, understanding that I shouldn't kill my neighbor and eat his flesh is, that's socially advantageous. And I think to a point it's hard-coded in our genetic makeup.
No, it is, right. That's another point that Dawkins makes, is that perhaps altruism is a trait that was selected for because it has an evolutionary advantage. And are you familiar with the prisoner's dilemma?
Yes.
That's an interesting thought experiment, so basically what it is two prisoners, you commit a crime, and the prisoners are kept in separate rooms, and the police go to one prisoner and they say, hey, testify, provide evidence for your cohort, and you will receive a reduced sentence. And he'll receive an extreme sentence. Like the difference is like 6 months to 10 years. And but then at the same time, the other guy is given the same. He's given the same deal. And so, in a one-off situation, the thinking is that each guy will betray the other every time, and which is probably true. But then you get into what's called the iterative prisoner's dilemma, where you do it over and over and over and over and over again. And what they found is that you don't really betray the other guy all the time. It's not advantageous to do so. It's advantageous to maybe clam up, and then there's this equilibrium that gets reached. And so without any moral lawgiver, it's advantageous to defend the other guy. And I mean, and that's just a thought experiment, that's just made up out of thin air. But here it is. You can think of a situation where it is advantageous to defend your fellow man, and no divine being told you to. It's just advantageous to do so.
And I think that's an excellent. That's as much of an argument as you need right there. Typically, you say that, but then you can go on and provide the plethora of examples where divine lawgiver didn't exist, or you your specific divine lawgiver didn't exist and people still had objective moralities.
But where that falls apart is in faith belief is that God gave us the right to choose right from wrong. And those prisoners wouldn't be in that situation if God didn't give us a right to perform sin.
Well, but that's reading something into the thought experiment that isn't there.
Yeah, but I'm just saying that's what.
You know, then I would say, like, okay, in our experiment, you're wrongly accused of a crime.
Yeah.
And so that takes the right and the wrong of the crime itself out. It's just like I said, it's a thought experiment. You have to set it up in such a way that there's only like one or two possible outcomes.
Yeah.
And like I said, it's an interesting way to think about it. We should. I mean, we're over an hour now. We should probably save some of the other ones for maybe next time.
Yeah, definitely. And we still have tons to go over, but
We didn't even go through all the definitions.
no, we didn't. Because some of the things just segued so nicely into other things.
No, that's
so
good.
we
Well,
went through
you know
them.
what? Maybe next time we'll talk about the arguments for and against God. I mean, we can start there.
Sure, I think that's good. So we're just over an hour now, maybe an hour and a half.
Hour 21.
Hour 21. All right, marathon.
Don't get me started. I can go all day.
Yeah, me too. We'd have an
We
all
we
day.
could actually right now
cast.
record the rest of the year, and then
Yeah.
just rehash it over.
I'll have to get another beer though.
Yeah, right. So thanks for tuning in. Again, this is Thursday, April 28th, and thanks for watching. You can catch the broadcast every Thursday, 8 p.m. Eastern Time on zombiepopcorn.
.com?
Do we have a website?
Yeah, just zombiepopcorn.com.
Do we have an email address?
Yes, we do. It is non-religious at zombie-popcorn.com.
And if someone wants to call the hotline,
They can always call the hotline. And wait, why are they calling the hotline? And why are they sending us emails?
in case they have any questions, comments, outbursts, they want to
Smart
call us
remarks.
out.
If we're wrong, correct us, which is a good thing.
Yeah, I'd like to get some feedback. I'd like anybody to provide any feedback whatsoever. If we did something wrong, if they agree with something, the feedback is good because that's part of the self-correcting process.
Yes. And I will have, well, the phone number is 757-337-2195. It's 757-337-2195. The email, again, is non-religious at zombie-popcorn.com. Non-religious at zombie-popcorn.com. I will put that in the show notes as well as on the screen if you're watching this. Everything is welcome. Please send whatever you got. We will respond if we can and talk about it on the show.
Yep.
Thank you for listening. And don't forget to tune in every Saturday night at 7 p.m. to listen to The Talking Dead. Saturday night at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. ZombiePopcorn.com.
I'll be there this Saturday.
Yes.
Looking forward to it.
Excellent.
Sweet.
Jesus got out here.
I thought I was a good Christian.
Jesus died on a cross. I go to church every Sunday. Jesus got out here. Then I read that because Jesus died on a cross for a rotten hooker.
I thought I was a good Christian.
I go to church every Sunday.
I thought I was a good Christian.
I go to church every Sunday. I'm a very religious person.
I thought I was a good Christian. The very lies the serpent told to Eve in the Garden of Eden. Garden of Eden. Garden of Eden. The gospel of Jesus Christ. Spread confusion and promote lies. The gospel of Jesus Christ. Spread confusion and promote lies. The gospel of Jesus Christ. Spread confusion and promote lies. The gospel of Jesus Christ. Spread confusion and promote lies. The gospel of Jesus Christ.